What do you do when the silence of heaven feels louder than your prayers? When life feels like ashes in your mouth and all you have left is a scream buried in your chest? This is Job's lament in the dark. Welcome to Midnight Psalms, where we dive into the shadows of Scripture to uncover the raw, unfiltered cries of the soul. If your faith has scars, if your hope trembles at midnight, you belong here. It began with silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that presses against your lungs and makes breathing feel like a burden, the kind that whispers, "You've been forgotten." Job wasn't just a man with losses, he was a man undone, a tower collapsed under the weight of heaven's silence. His friends gave speeches, his wife offered despair, but none of them stood in the hollow where his heart used to beat. He looked at the sky and saw no answers, only clouds that mocked him with their stillness. His prayers rose like smoke, but no wind carried them. The God he trusted now felt like a stranger wrapped in shadow. Have you ever felt that, when the very one you worship hides behind the ache? Every morning was a reminder that grief doesn't sleep. Job sat on ashes not just as tradition, but because that's all his life had become, a burnt offering with no fire left. His wealth gone, his children buried, his body wrecked. But worse than all of that, was the question that echoed louder than the cries, why? Not the theological why, but the human one. The why that comes from a heart begging not for answers, but for connection. God, he cried, do you see me? It's not weakness to ask. It's not doubt to weep. It's human. And Job was heartbreakingly human. They told him it must be his fault, that hidden sin had stirred divine anger. But Job knew his hands were clean even if they now trembled. The worst pain isn't always the pain itself, but being misunderstood in the middle of it. Job wasn't just hurting. He was isolated. He was left alone in the courtroom of suffering without a defense. His reputation stained by their assumptions. His pain deepened by their certainty. He didn't need correction, he needed comfort. But have you noticed? When people don't understand your pain, they often try to explain it away, instead of just sitting in the ashes with you. Job didn't curse God, but he did curse the day he was born. And maybe that's more honest than we'd like to admit. There are days so dark you wish they never began. Nights so heavy you wonder if morning will ever come. Job said, "Let the day perish on which I was born." Not out of rebellion but out of weariness. This wasn't about blasphemy, it was about honesty. And sometimes the most sacred prayer is a groan too deep for words. Sometimes faith sounds like lament, like silence, like barely holding on. But even that is worship. The truth is Job didn't want answers, he wanted presence. He wasn't crying out for theology, he was crying out for a touch. And yet, heaven stayed silent. That's what makes his story so haunting. Not just the suffering but the waiting. He sat in the wreckage, not knowing the ending, not reading the last chapter. He didn't know restoration was coming. He didn't have the benefit of hindsight. He just had today. And today was bitter. He spoke his pain aloud, not to perform but to survive. Sometimes saying it out loud is the only way to keep breathing. Have you ever felt like your story was a battlefield between heaven and hell? That your suffering wasn't just pain, but a cosmic stage where your faith was being tested for sport? Job had no idea that behind the curtain, a conversation in heaven had started a war in his life. And he never got the full explanation. Which raises a chilling thought, what if we never do? What if our pain remains a mystery? Would we still trust? Job didn't get clarity, but he clung to honesty. And maybe that was enough. Maybe integrity in the dark is more powerful than certainty in the light. When Job spoke, he didn't filter himself. He said things we'd be too afraid to say in church. He accused God of injustice. He begged for death. He wept openly. And yet, God never rebuked his honesty. The ones God corrected were the ones who tried to defend him with cliches. But the man who mourned loudly, who dared to question, was the one God honored in the end. What if God prefers raw cries over polished sermons? What if authenticity moves heaven more than correctness? Job teaches us that permission to feel is holy. Job's body was covered in sores, his soul drenched in sorrow. He had nothing left to offer, no strength, no praise, no peace. But somehow he still spoke. Not because he had hope, but because silence would have been surrender. And that's what grief does, it steals your voice. But Job wrestled for his. He said, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." Not because he felt like it, but because something deeper than feeling held him. That's the kind of faith that doesn't glow, it bleeds. It's not clean, it's not pretty, but it's real. There's a kind of darkness that makes you forget the light ever existed. Job was there. He wasn't looking for a miracle. He was just trying to survive the next moment. His faith wasn't strong, it was desperate. And sometimes that's all you need. Not strength, but surrender. Not answers, but endurance. He didn't win with certainty. He survived with honesty. And that's the power of lament. It makes space for healing by naming the wound. He wasn't trying to move on, he was learning how to sit still without falling apart. And then, God spoke. Not with explanations, but with questions. Not with comfort, but with presence. From a whirlwind, God asked Job where he was when the foundations of the earth were laid. At first glance it feels harsh. But look closer, God wasn't mocking. He was reorienting. Reminding Job that mystery isn't absence. That silence isn't abandonment. And that presence doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes God doesn't solve the pain, He enters it. And that is enough. If you are enjoying this video, please like, subscribe and hit the notification bell to help this channel reach more people. Now let's continue. In that whirlwind, Job didn't get the why, but he got the who. And when God shows up, even unanswered pain starts to make sense in a different way. The pain didn't disappear, but it was no longer alone. God didn't apologize for the silence. He didn't explain the tragedy. He simply revealed himself, not as a cruel puppeteer, but as the creator who holds the seas in his hands and still sees every tear. Job was not comforted by logic, but by presence. Sometimes what you need most isn't an explanation, it's a reminder that you're not invisible, that your pain is not a footnote in eternity, that the God of galaxies still walks into ashes to sit with you. When Job answered God, he didn't defend himself. He didn't demand restitution. He said something quiet, something holy. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. In the ashes, he found a deeper intimacy than blessing ever gave him. This wasn't resignation, it was revelation. He saw not just a powerful God but a present one. One who could handle all his cries, all his doubts, all his devastation, and still call him righteous. Job wasn't rewarded for perfection but for honesty. And in that moment, what had been a story of suffering turned into a sacred encounter that still echoes through time. Job's life didn't end in ashes. But he didn't know that during the silence. His restoration came, yes, but it wasn't the reward for enduring. It was grace. Undeserved, unexplained, overflowing. He received double what he had lost, not as a transaction but as a testimony. A reminder that God does not forget those who weep in the dark. That seasons of loss are not the end of the story. That the God who allows the storm can also rebuild what was shattered. And yet, even if the restoration had never come, Job's faith would still be legendary, because he worshipped before the blessing. Job's story doesn't promise that we won't suffer. It promises that suffering can be sacred. That silence is not abandonment. That questions can be holy. And that faith is not the absence of struggle, but the refusal to let go, even when it hurts. His lament wasn't weakness, it was worship in disguise. His cries were not failures, they were proof of a relationship deep enough to wrestle with. And that kind of faith doesn't come from sermons, it comes from scars. Job didn't find peace because life got better, he found it because God came close. In our world of filtered faith and polished performances, Job is a reminder that God can handle our mess. That spirituality isn't pretending everything's okay, it's dragging our wounds to the feet of the one who sees. Job sat in ashes, screamed at the sky, lost everything, and still ended up in the embrace of the Almighty. Not because he figured it all out, but because he kept showing up. Kept speaking. Kept aching. And maybe that's the secret, not strength, but staying. Staying in the tension. Staying in the ache. Staying long enough for God to whisper through the whirlwind. There's something strangely beautiful about the fact that Job's story is in the Bible at all. It means God wanted us to know that lament is part of the journey. That pain is not a detour, it's a chapter. That crying out doesn't disqualify you from faith, it deepens it. We don't follow a God who avoids suffering. We follow one who stepped into it, who bled, who wept, who asked, "Why have you forsaken me?" So when you lament, you're not turning away from God, you're joining a chorus that echoes from Job to Jesus, from ashes to eternity. If you're in the middle of your own silent storm, know this, your story is not over. The silence is not forever. And even if the answers never come, you're not abandoned. God is not offended by your questions. He's not distant from your doubt. He is closer than breath even when he feels far. And like Job, you may not get the ending you imagined, but you will get presence. You will get a God who walks into the wreckage, who holds your pain with nail-scarred hands, who whispers hope when hope seems impossible. You will get something deeper than explanation. You will get Emmanuel, What would happen if we stopped hiding our pain in the name of faith? If we dared to pray like Job, not with answers but with ache? What if our worship wasn't just songs on Sunday, but tears on Tuesday? Job teaches us that sacredness lives in sorrow, that faith is forged in fire, that the truest devotion doesn't wear a smile, it bears a cross. If you're hurting, you're not failing. You're not faithless. You're in good company. You're in Job's company. You're in Jesus' company. And the story is still being written. There are seasons when all you have is ashes, when nothing makes sense, when even your breath feels heavy. And in those seasons, Job reminds us, sit, weep, cry, groan, but don't stop showing up. Don't let silence become your grave. Keep speaking. Keep wrestling. Because in the chaos, God is not absent. He's listening. He's preparing the next page. And even if you can't feel him, he's near, closer than your next heartbeat. And that presence, though invisible, will be the anchor that keeps you from sinking. This is Job's lament in the dark, and maybe it's yours too. Maybe this isn't just a story from ancient scrolls. Maybe it's a mirror. If so, let Job's raw, relentless honesty remind you that God is not fragile, and neither is your faith. That your story, even in suffering, holds sacred weight. And if you're still here, still breathing, still aching, you're not alone. You're seen. You're heard. And you are loved beyond explanation. If this spoke to you, let it breathe in someone else's life too. Share. Reflect. And when the night feels long, remember, even Job had a morning.